Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Hello and welcome to today's Battle Mech review. Today we're going to be looking at the Starslayer, which is one of those mechs where I always confuse it with the Night Sky. It's just a weird situation in my own brain here. At least the two of them are close enough, so if I've got to get a facility ready, at least I can just say, like, get a medium mech bay ready, and it generally works. It's a fun mech in itself, even though the original model is subpar in my opinion. The more modern models are quite interesting. Honestly, it is very popular with the Lyran portion of the universe. It's not super common anywhere else, but, you know, you're going to be able to see a couple and grab a couple if you're digging through various archives and various boxes of mechs that are left standing. I found that cool comic there on the right there is Starslayer. I honestly don't know what this is. I might have to dig into that to try to figure out what that is. Old Terran comics is a thing that I do enjoy, and this one looks positively weird. Odd situations, odd things that I find when I dig on the comnets. So let's get into it. By 2765, the good people of the SLDF wanted to replace the Crab, which was barely 50 years old at the time. A military procurement contract is basically how you run the economy on a whole lot of planets, and a lot of those contracts are viewed as gifts that you give some people so that they can keep their economy going and people be really happy. I'm not a fan of that particular way of doing military procurement. You should probably just go with, well, we need this, who can provide it to us? And the Crab was a great mech in itself, so there's no reason that it needed to be replaced outside of maybe doing a few upgrades to it. Blue Shot Weapons of the Lyran Commonwealth was the winner of that particular contract, and bid heavily on various other contracts in order to make sure that they could make it big and be one of those big companies providing weapons to the largest military in Inner Sphere history. The STY-2C Starslayer is the design that won the contest, and Blue Shot was ready to start production and deployment in 2772, just as the SLDF budget was kind of slashed by a guy called Stefan Amaris. Bobby Steiner II was a calculating douchebag on top of things, so he asked the Blue Shot to withhold any delivery to the SLDF until he was sure that Kerensky was going to win the big fight. This did allow him to get quite a few of those Starslayers in his own inventory, however, which would be useful in a few years when the Succession War started. As the first Succession War was going on, well, unfortunately, the facilities building the Starslayers were damaged, and the technology that was required to build the Starslayer was basically lost. So that made this particular mech a thing of history in a very, very short period. There was a small number of Starslayers which were in the SLDF control, and they were taken during the Exodus. But the newborn clans didn't really use them a whole lot. You do have an early clan variant that floats around in the record, but it is not a thing that was used enough to warrant a 2C variant or even a full C variant. Blue Shot's facilities were destroyed during the First Succession War by the Free Worlds League military, and the design basically became extinct due to the fact that you didn't have double heatsinks and ferrofibrous armor, which were basically integral to that particular design. Without them, I don't think the Starslayer would work at all. Unlike many mechs which survived the Succession War due to machining and spare parts, like the Guillotine or even the Lancelot, the Starslayer basically died off, and the design just went into the sunset basically at the end of the First Succession War. The Second Succession War, you might have seen one or two floating around, and it was completely done afterwards. The original STY-2C is a medium trooper with a top speed of 86 kilometers per hour, which is perfectly reasonable for a 50-ton mech. It uses the same Magna 250 that you would use in the Crab, making logistics for this particular machine really easy. You get 2.5 tons of jump jet equipment, giving you 150-meter jump range, which is very useful in most mechs this particular category. But this does mean that you have to trade something off, which is the armor in this case, which is quite thin at 7 tons of ferrofibrous on a standard chassis. The ammo feed for the one weapon which requires ammo is protected by case though, so you are, well, decently survivable in that particular group. You get 11 double heat sinks, which was viewed as sufficient at moment of production, and the entire design was made to be fairly rugged, making it require less maintenance than a regular mech its size, kind of similar once again to your Crab. Another place where the Starslayer did outgun its predecessor was having the same main weapons with 2 blue shot large laser, a pair of Raising Devil medium lasers, and a blue shot standard small laser. You get just that tiny little bit of extra punch in terms of laser, but it does mean that you're going to be running otter if you shoot everything. As you can notice, most of those weapons are built by Blue Shot or by Blue Shot derivative with the Raising Devils. And it did mean that the mech was easier to build, let's say, by Blue Shot, and they were able to make a larger profit off of it. You do need to volley fire or bracket fire if you don't want to run extremely hot, especially if you jump, so this is a bit of a drawback here. Finally, you get a 4-tube of SRM from the company Moonshot, which is not a Blue Shot derivative, but, built in the same planet, so it gives you some tank hunting and utility when you're forced to use the design in ways that the Crabs was not meant to do. But it does also mean that you have to stay closer to supply lines because you'll need to resupply those missiles. I do agree that the STY-2C is superior to the standard CRB-27. The basic Crabby is pretty good, but it's not the one that was used by the Star League at the time of the release. They were mostly now running CRB-27B with double heat sinks, or the 27SL, which is another beast altogether. The SL requires a whole lot of fancy parts, an XL engine, pulse lasers, and all those fancy bits and bobs, meaning that it's not as good or as survivable as it could be. The 27B, however, uses a similar grade of technology to the Starslayer with ferrofibrous armor and double heat sinks. I've seen various matches between the two mechs. The Crab 27B generally came out on top, even though it was less mobile because it doesn't have any jump jets, but it has a superior range with a pair of ER large laser, but where it really shines is that it has better heat dissipation and better armor, meaning that you can shoot all of your weapons on the Crab 27B generally every single time you need to shoot them, and you're not going to run terribly hot, while the Starslayer has to volley fire in order to not burn itself alive. The increase in armor on the Crab also makes it more reliable as a trooper. So I would understand if the STY-2C would have been introduced and never reached full acceptance by the Star League later on. The Starslayer came back into production once Blue Shot weapons got their factories on Loxley upgraded and up and running in 3056. The big difference between the STY-2C and 3C is a bunch of new parts being used, mostly off-the-shelf lasers from other major producers rather than home-brewed equipment. This made the mech a little bit more reliable because it was easier to maintain once you were in the field, but it did cut into Blue Shot's profit margin by a small amount. The other big change is that the body is now made of endo steel rather than standard materials, meaning that you save 2.5 tons, which you immediately use to reinforce the armored plates on the design. This 3C Starslayer is a lot more reliable and a lot tougher, and this one I think is the good version of what the 2C could have been. The AFFC, and especially the Federated Suns portion of it, wanted their own variant of the Starslayer with a little bit more long-range capabilities, and Blue Shot introduced the STY-3D in 3057 as a response to that. The 3D removes the ammo dependencies from the design by stripping off the SRM4 and the case, allowing the small laser to be replaced by another medium laser. The big change, however, is that the torso-mounted large laser is swapped with an ERPPC, giving you better range and firepower at the cost of, well, quite a bit of heat. To balance this, however, you do have an extra heat sinks, which would allow you to, shoot that ERPPC and maybe one or two other weapons and not cook yourself alive. The Jihad give us a STY-3DR, which is not really all that common, all things considered, but it's a design that's meant for that period. The arm-mounted large laser is replaced in order to stick a Guardian ECM in, and your ER PPC that was in that shoulder mount there is replaced with a heavy PPC to give you a bit more firepower. The armor is replaced with 10 tons of light ferrofibrous plates. A bit of a weird trade, but the reason why is that they use some of the room that would have been used for the standard ferrofibrous plate to stick triple strength myomer in order to take advantage of each spikes you are going to have with that design. It's not entirely terrible, but it is really meant for one particular type of engagement due to that Guardian ECM and that particular weapon loadout. It's not terrible, but it's probably not one of my favorite designs. The newest version of the Starslayer came out in 3145 as the STY-4C. This one uses a base chassis made of Indosteel from the Inner Sphere, a standard engine, and triple strength myomer, while the rest of the equipment is mostly clan graded. This is either sourced from Clan Seafox, which is okay to trade with the people at Blue Shot, or from Defiance, because Defiance kind of knows how to make quite a few different bits of clan equipment. Your main guns are now a pair of improved heavy large laser, giving you a titanic amounts of firepower in trade-off of a massive amount of heat. At closer range, not that much closer, I think you would have a pair of clan ER medium lasers. Actually, you get more range on those than on those heavy improved heavy lasers. And an ER small laser, which is all in all a massive amount of punch. To compensate for that extra heat, you get a coolant pod, which is okay, I guess. And the SRM is now a one-shot 4-tube of SRM, which is entirely pointless and should have been removed for either another coolant pod or something along those lines. Give it a few years and you'll probably have a more modern version of this with clan-graded Endosteel and clan-graded ferrofibrous. But, for now, this is a very strong striker, even though you do have to be quite careful at what you're shooting. Let's say I was sitting down and wanted to make that 4C something a little bit more reliable, at least in my opinion. What would I do? Well, first off, I'd take off those two improved heavy large laser. They're really good weapons, but they do run extensively hot, and you won't be able to fire them steadily. So you take those off, and you replace them with standard clan ER large lasers. Same weight, better range, better heat dissipation. It's not a very awful gun, and it's going to work really well. The other problem is that iOS SRM4, which is pretty much pointless. If you take that off, you go back to something that would be closer to that 3D model, and you could probably swap a few things around. I'm just trying to think of what I would like to do. I mean, you could take off the coolant pod altogether and put in a regular missile launcher. That would be an idea. The coolant pod is not a bad idea, though, on this particular design. Look at the heat scale there. What I'm going to do instead, I'm going to take off the ER small laser, put another ER medium laser in. Gives us a nice amount of punch there. And what can we do with one extra ton? Well, we could stick another coolant pod in. That would be another idea. Gives you a little bit more reliability. You could stick clan ferrofibrous plates on, but I mean, you need to be able to build those. This here would be a version of our Starslayer 4C that has better range. It can be served as a sniper. It has more coolant pods, making you able to shoot more things more of the time. Got a bigger medium range bracket with more ER medium lasers. You could stick a small pulse laser instead of one of the ER medium laser in order to hunt down infantry. I mean, there's quite a few different things you could do. It is not a bad mech at all. You could take out a coolant pod or even both coolant pods and stick 2 extra double heat sinks in. At that point, maybe you'd even want to take off the triple strength myomer, put back regular ferrofibrous. There's a whole lot of different variants. as to what you could do. But I think this is what I would do with the 4C if it came into my shop, because honestly, that improved the Streak SRM4. Actually, it's not even a Streak, it's a regular SRM4, is rather pointless. It takes up a lot of room for nothing very useful. And I prefer ER large lasers to improved heavy lasers. The Starslayer is relatively tough, at least in its 3 variant, and it requires very little maintenance and uses mostly basic part until you get to the ones that use triple strength myomer, meaning that it's a pretty good selling point to me as a technician and probably to you as a logistical expert. I do prefer the Crab, especially the 27B, but the Starslayer will fill out a wider role of cavalry trooper and flanker, meaning that it can go in a lance with other mechs with the same speed and mobility, things like our 275 Mafia. The Crab is not able to fill those roles. Normally, it is more meant to be a line trooper. So the Starslayer and the modern Crab and the modern Starslayer just don't fight each other for the same slot. Putting money down to get a Starslayer is not a bad idea in most cases, and it's not the hardest mech to get either. You basically just need to have the money and a buy order in order to get one. So I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. I thank you very much for listening to me for so long, and I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.